Hello, everyone, and happy Wednesday. My name is Bryce Kuhn alongside Glenn West and Sonny Ship back here on the Go 24/7 podcast as we talk spring football, which is it's in a weird time. It's starting to dwindle down a little bit as we get closer and closer to the, and I'm going to put air quotes, spring game, because we still really, I don't think, guys, we really understand what the spring game is going to look like yet for LSU. It's going to be different, not going to be a normal one for sure. But as we continue to see what Brian Kelly has to say in press conferences, we continue to see, Glenn does, that is, the little excerpts of practices that he does get to see. We're learning more and more, and Brian Kelly opened up this past Tuesday more in his press conference on a couple of topics that we're going to tackle today. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and also follow us wherever you listen on your podcast, audio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get that. Make sure to follow us, like us, and subscribe there as well. Well, guys, let's start right here with this. Glenn, I want to start with the transfer portal conversation because that was kind of one of the hot topics coming in. Sonny has kind of alluded to this. Would there be any exits? Would there be anything they want to add when the portal opens back up after spring practice? So, Glenn, kind of tell us and let us know what were Brian Kelly's thoughts on the portal. And I know the big one was they're not really going to look for a big-name starter. It seems like depth is going to be the way they go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously the hope that you have when you kind of head into the second period, the second transfer portal period here, is that you don't really feel like you have a need at a starting position. And so I think one of the great things about this spring has been you've been able to really learn about some of the depth at some of these positions that LSU could be looking at and just kind of where they could look to add a couple of pieces. Sounds like on the defensive side of the ball, they're certainly keeping their options open in terms of adding potentially another defensive lineman, another potential corner or safety. And then obviously on the offensive line, you have a need on the interior. I think that's kind of the nice way of putting it. I think you got some guys coming for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You got some true freshmen coming in here. You got Mason Lunsford coming in as well. But you've really gotten to see, I think, kind of the real edge of the depth chart here with Bo Bordelon really coming along, Marlon Martinez. Does he kind of stick around after this spring? And there could be a need there to fill, an interior lineman position, whether it's at guard or center, somebody that can maybe play across the O-line a little bit for you and help out with some depth. So I do think that it's, the bigger point here that Kelly was trying to make is that they're not really looking to get that, Joe Burrow kind of impact piece in here. They're looking to maybe sand out the edges, look for a few pieces that, they feel like can help and be competitive and maybe play in spots next fall. But in terms of looking for the big time, impact player as a starter, I'm not sure that's exactly what they want. And Coach Kelly kind of reaffirmed that yesterday in his press conference.
Yeah, and that's kind of a good spot to sit in. I mean, to be able to just say, hey, we're going to refine the edges. We're going to bring in some depth guys. Sonny, you posted on the board this morning about kind of a wish list that you might want to see. And so what, if there is any, and there's some spots, and Glenn highlighted, what would you like to see this team kind of tackle? Is it best available? I know we're getting into NFL draft type of terminology here. Best available, or is it really keying on specific positions?
Yeah, no. I think if you have multiple slots you don't feel good about, then maybe you look at that best available. But I think what this boils down to here is that they're looking for multiple years of eligibility. They don't need a one-hit wonder. They got Omar Spates. They got him to come in. He's kind of that one-hit wonder. Got 1 year left to play. Joe Fouché last year, kind of fit that bill too. But I don't think that they're in a position now to where they need to do that. They hit the portal aggressively and hard in the first portal window. And so now I think what you're doing now is you're trying to find some pieces that you can add to your roster, but that they're going to come in a situation to where you can develop them. And at the same time, you have multiple years to develop them. Denver Harris is a perfect example. You got a guy who comes in where he played 1 year. He's still got 3 years left to play plus a red shirt to burn. So guys like that is what I think you'll start. Is what I think you'll see. Mason Lunsford, I think, is a good example of that. Now, he's a guy with him not being here in the spring. He's now going to get here at the beginning of the summer, and so when you get an offensive lineman like that, you have to think that he's not looking at a situation. Now, granted, he could be tossed into that more into that topic of needing to play early, but it's a situation to where you're looking at him for not necessarily for this coming year, but maybe for next year. A guy that comes in, gives you some snaps this year. Now, all of a sudden, when you're in the spring next year, instead of having to plug a redshirt freshman offensive lineman in there, you've got a fifth-year senior who has some eligibility and who also is now going to be a second year in the program. So I think that's what they're really going to try to fill out here. Looking at it's always tricky to you work looking at the roster numbers trying to figure out, okay, we feel that Damian Ramos was put on scholarship and no Josh Williams was, but who else? And so it's kind of hard to sift through those numbers, but I think when you look at it right now, a good number is somewhere between that 4 to 6 number, probably closer to 4 is where I think LSU is in terms of actual openings for the 85-man scholarship limit. So anyone that you lose, you would obviously want to, you would obviously want to go in and replace that guy. But if you can inch 1 or 2 more towards that 85 number, and then it still puts you in a situation where you're going into the 2024 class. You don't have, you're not going to have a signing cap again. And so you're basically, you're not going to be just recruiting to that 25 number. You're going to be recruiting to that 85 number. And so I think that's where, that's what this second transfer portal window, that's what the importance is going to be on. It's going to be on adding some depth guys that have those multiple years left to play that you can also develop, that they're not necessarily so green coming out of high school. They have a little bit of, familiarity with the college program. And so it can kind of speed up that development a little bit.
Yeah, and what you described right there was kind of what Kelly was talking about, the defensive back room. And I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on this. I put up a piece on it, and I thought it was interesting because the question that came from the media member was talking about, is there concern? Obviously, Sonny, you and Glenn have obviously kind of reported this on the VIP side of things, but I think people kind of know now that Major Burns and Greg Brooks are 2 guys that did not participate in spring ball, at least the viewing period that Glenn got to see, and not really – it's not detrimental injuries by any means. They're going to be ready for fall camp, everyone feels like, obviously. But is there a concern where they need to add somebody, or are these so many new faces enough? And Glenn, I wanted to get your thoughts on that, kind of the tone that Kelly spoke with about that question. What do you feel? Do you feel like they have enough, or is that another position they could go look? And I mentioned earlier, April 15th is when this portal opens. I said after spring practice. This is in 2-3 days that we're going to see this portal open up again. So, Glenn, kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think probably if you're looking to add somebody out of the 2 positions, I think safety is probably the one you're leaning towards. Greg Brooks and Major Burns. Yeah, it doesn't sound like they're going to be significant injuries, but that doesn't mean that they can't miss time later in the year. And what are your options after in that kind of scenario? And I think what you're seeing right now is they're moving a lot of guys around. Javian Toviano is a guy who's played some safety in the last couple weeks. They like what Ryan Yates has been able to do. Sage Ryan is kind of they're penciling him in as kind of the nickel corner guy. I think he's going to be someone that you can rotate at that spot. But as far as like a true safety, they're I think they're a little bit lacking in depth right there in terms of just guys that they feel like they can rely on behind Greg Brooks and Major Burns. And so I do think that's an area where you could certainly see them look at in the portal. In terms of, Kelly's response to that, I think it was, kind of expected. I think there's, they're still learning about that group, still learning who can fit where. Like I said, they're still moving some pieces around. Maybe you get into a situation this fall and you got to move another corner to safety, or you move a nickel corner to safety. There's some versatility that a lot of those defensive backs can play with. And so it's just about figuring out which guys you really think can play that spot, which guys can learn and pick it up quickly. And Look, I think the obvious answer here is that you hope that Greg Brooks and Major Burns last the whole year without getting injured. But Major's a guy that we've seen, even in his 2 years here, has dealt with a lot of injuries, and you've got to be prepared for, that kind of scenario, and you have to have a reliable option back there. So I think that's probably why, you got some of that response from Kelly yesterday.
Sonny, have you seen a spring practice where LSU has been this thin at some key positions to be able to get some real reps? I mean, Kelly turned it what I thought could have been a negative into a positive, saying, hey, it's been refreshing to see a lot of young guys being able to have to make checks and have to go through that process, which you and I talked about way at the beginning of the year, is huge for their development because if they're put in a spot in the fall. Have you seen this? Maybe it was last year. I wasn't around for last year under Kelly's first year, but have you seen a spring practice where they've been so thin, and how does that affect it really?
Yeah, last year I think last year they were thin just because of the roster numbers that had gotten, to the point that it had gotten to before they went to the Texas Bowl and played Kansas State with, I can't remember, 38 maybe scholarship players. I forget. Seems like that number changes every time another story
It's lower
comes
and
out.
lower.
Yeah, but I don't. No, and I think and I think when you look at it, this spring they did have a lot of injuries. The good thing is that a lot of them were kind of holdovers and things that they were had to fix from the 2022 season. So that puts you in that puts you in a little bit of a better spot there. You're not having guys going out, knock on wood, tearing their ACLs or their Achilles, or to where not only are they're going to be out, they're going to miss the 2023 season or a large chunk of it too. So that's a good thing. But I also think that what you see is just another example of where the roster was when Kelly got here, and that he provided a short gap measure last year. I think this year what they hope is that they were able to provide that short-term gap, but then also the long-term with guys who will be around next year too. You don't have as many guys who are susceptible to being just a 1 year, guy, and then all of a sudden you have to go out and you have to find another transfer to come in. So I think they're in a better situation from that standpoint, but I don't think there's any question that the spring has really kind of limited some things that they were able to do. We'll see it in the spring game. I imagine it'll be one of these things to where, first downs get a point, fumbles, interceptions, things like that, to try to create some kind of competitive atmosphere for the players. But I don't think there's any question that injuries have really kind of limited what they wanted to be able to do this spring, particularly probably along the offensive line and the defensive line. It's nice that you have Mason Smith and Mekhi Wingo out, and you're able to get a lot of reps for Jacoby and Guillory, and then some of the other younger guys. But on the flip side, you want to see what you have. You want to see what you have. You want to have that reassurance, and then you want you want your depth guys to also be practicing for the situations that they're going to be seeing in the fall, I think too. So I don't think that the injuries just made the spring, a total mess or anything. But I think that it did put an emphasis on. I think it did put an emphasis on Kelly and them having to be a lot smarter, be a lot more careful with guys. And Glenn, just to kind of piggyback on something you said about the safety, I think you made a great point on that. That if they do look into the portal, that it would probably be the safety position. You mentioned it was great that Brian Kelly said that the Major Burns injury, because there was some fear that it could have been a more serious injury like he suffered his first year here in Baton Rouge. And so for that not to come to fruition, I think is really good. But if you look after Brooks and Burns, your safeties, you've got Ryan Yates and Javian Toviano, who have both, who have been here and stuff. Sage Ryan, Matthew Langlois, who's still coming off of, he's coming off of his ACL
injury
that he had last year. So I think that probably is the one position that you may be able to go out and get a player who has 1 year, who only has 1 year left to play, who may be in a situation where he may be coming off of an injury, or something extraordinary to where he's okay with coming in and with being a 1 year guy. That might be the one position to where you could see them maybe try to find that. I think it puts you in a tough spot though, because a lot of guys coming in with 1 year to play, they want a little, not necessarily reassurance, but they want to be able to see that, okay, the path to getting on the field more is not as bumpy as it looks on paper. If that makes sense. So, but I think it's going to be interesting to see if they're able to do that, and if someone like that, comes along. It may be even a situation to where you saw with Seven Banks last year. They took Seven Banks hoping that he's able to make this recovery from his injury and have that bounce back type of year. Another potential option could be, do we see one of the corners maybe play some safety? Deuce Chestnut's a guy that I think of that kind of comes to mind.
Yeah.
How are you going to fit? You've got Zy Alexander, you've got Deuce Chestnut. Denver Harris didn't play a lot last year. J.K. Johnson played some, but I think that those two right there are guys who are coming in who left programs where they were starters, and they were entrenched starters too. And so, how are you able to get these experienced corners? Then you got Chestnut, you got J.K. Johnson, you got LaTerrence Welch, you got all these other guys too. And are you able to shift some guys around to fit those pieces? If Chestnut would have been active in the spring right here, it probably would have been able to help with that decision. But I think that that's going to be an interesting storyline to follow, over the summer and into fall camp, is all of these transfer pieces who came in playing a lot of football at the places they left. How do they get them in situations to where they're still involved? Maybe not as involved as they were at the places that they left, but enough involved to where you're able to maybe mix and match a few pieces like they were able to do this spring.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to bounce off of something that Sonny said there. I think probably the biggest thing that this spring you hoped to have had coming in that you just didn't wind up getting as much as continuing to build the continuity at some of those positions, especially along the offensive line, where that is just so key. I mean, you have, 4 of your starters that are playing and participating and getting a lot of reps, but you don't have your starting center in Charles Turner, and you have to be careful about the reps that you give those starters, because the last thing you want is to see another starting lineman go down because you're working them too hard. And so, I think the lack of depth you certainly could see on the offensive line this spring. You have guys coming in, but you didn't really get the most out of this spring, I think, that you probably could have hoped for coming in. And the same is true with the defensive line. I mean, I really wanted to see what Mason Smith and Mekhi Wingo looked like next to some of these edge rushing options that they brought in via the portal. And we just didn't get a chance to see it. And that's because these guys are, they're rehabbing from injuries. And, it's good that it sounds like they're going to be ready for summer workouts. But, this is time where it's time you can't get back, right? I mean, it's just an extra 3 or 4 weeks here where you could have really found out a little bit more about your foundation and just kind of what this defense and offensive line could look like. And I think that's just an area that you kind of lost a little bit in terms of time. Not to say that you can't make it up, because you absolutely can in the fall, but I think you don't have the clear picture, I guess, heading into the summer that you really hoped LSU would be able to have with so much of the returning pieces coming back for this season. So I think that was probably just been my kind of overall takeaway from spring practice, has just been because of some of these injuries, because some of these guys aren't yet on campus. You don't have the full picture yet, and that's for a year or two where the foundation was really built in that first year. You were hoping to see a little bit more of that continuity carry over into this spring, and I think you're going to get that this fall and certainly this summer as well. But to not get it these first, few weeks, these few, several weeks of practice, I think is probably just a little bit of lost time there that you can't get back.
I guess that means that fall camp, it'll be a good time for people to subscribe to Go 24/7 because there's going to be a lot
Sure,
of talking points that we
absolutely.
don't see in the spring. Let's stay defensively here real quick because I want to talk about obviously the timeline for a new defensive line coach. Now, Brian Kelly opened a lot up on that on Tuesday, talking about he said it could be around the middle of May. Sonny, we had some questions. I mean, does that mean that obviously a guy that I think all of us felt like had a decent shot at this job, and Gerald Chapman is not in the running? Now, Kelly did reiterate and say, hey, he's a candidate. But Sonny, I'll start with you on this. I mean, the timeline. Listen, we've all covered football varying time frames, but I know that when you see something be pushed out further, the immediate thought is it's not going to be an in-house guy. Now, you've said that you kind of think it still could be that they're going to go out of house on this. How are you feeling about Chapman's chances, and still any names that you think could be in play here as we get closer and closer to the end of spring ball?
Excuse me. Yeah, I think when Kelly first talked about this, he had mentioned some of the things that you got to have some SEC experience. You got to have been in some SEC wars. You've got to have recruiting skins on the wall. You've got to be a I don't want to say a decorated recruiter, but you've got to have some experience, and you've got to have produce some results in recruiting. And just those two criteria alone, for me, the first time he opened up about it, those seemed like kind of like the two main things that that he really kind of harped on. And Chapman doesn't have either of those. So that's what kind of made me think that, that this is probably going to be a situation to where he's going to be looking outside to bring someone in. He said that they didn't want to really deal with it during the spring. And, then he tossed out that 3-week timeline. So, what does that mean? Does that mean 3 weeks from now, 3 weeks from the end of spring? So that's why I kind of looked at that middle of May, as kind of like, that sounds kind of like what he was kind of gearing towards. But I don't think he's got someone locked up. I think that, like anything, when you're going through resumes, when you're looking at people who are interested in your job and stuff, there's going to be okay, I liked it. I like this one right here. I like this resume. I like this right here. I like this right here. And you can kind of start to formulate like a little pecking order if this was your final pool right here, kind of going in. So I think that's probably where Kelly is right now. Look, he's been around long enough. He knows enough people out there. He knows he knows the names being floated out there. Bo Davis is a name that a lot of people just jumped on from the very beginning. He certainly seems to fit the criteria for what Kelly, is looking for. Granted, he does bring a little bit of baggage with him, so how does that, how will that factor into this, to this long term? But I think that this is probably one of those cases to where he realizes what Jamar Cain brought to the table as far as being a national recruiter, as far as when Jamar Cain's name is inserted into a high profile national recruitment, that it kind of just lends some credibility to it, that it's kind of like, okay, well, LSU is going to be in it right here. They're in the mix. You got Jamar Cain on there. So I think that that type of person that has that type of, that has that type of reach, I think is what he's looking for. And so that's what makes me think that Chapman, that Chapman still has some skins on the wall to attain to be able to check off those boxes. That's not to say that, look, no one has the advantage that Gerald Chapman has of being able to, of having a job interview to where he's in the room, he's in the building nonstop. That can be good, and that can also be bad. But from talking to everyone, it sounds like Chapman has made the most of it, that he has not done anything to hurt his candidacy in this, that I think it's just a matter of, does he have those prerequisite skills that, that Kelly is looking for in this hire. So, I don't, as far as other names, I think you look at, that you start to look at guys that Kelly may have worked with before, that he has some relationships with before. And then you start to kind of, and then you can kind of start to maybe hone in a little bit on, on that specific pool. But he wasn't willing. He wasn't too willing to toss out any names yesterday.
No,
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 wasn't
and
too open. Glenn, any thoughts on that?
yeah. I think probably the biggest thing, or just another component to that, is that they felt very comfortable with running this thing through the spring without making a rash
Yeah.
decision. And I think part of that is because they have some trust in what Chapman's able to do. We've talked with Jacoby and Guillory, and he really loves Chapman and what he's been able to do with the defensive line group this spring. Talked to a number of recruits, defensive line recruits who have been on campus and been around the program, and they have nothing but good things to say about LSU and why and the fact that they're still in the mix for some of these big name defensive linemen without having a defensive line coach hire. I think speaks volumes to what LSU is as a program, what they hope to be, moving forward here under Coach Kelly. And I think it's a good thing that they didn't feel the pressure off of that news, because a lot of teams, when you lose a coach, that kind of far into spring, and you had some time to build repertoire with the players and everything, and all of a sudden they're just gone. You might feel the kind of the knee jerk reaction to make a quick move. And I think the fact that LSU didn't make a quick move, the fact that they're taking their time with this, that they realize the bigger picture here is to bring in a guy that checks all those boxes that Sonny just mentioned, and that they felt comfortable with promoting the guy from within to be able to handle this for at least in the immediate, kind of interim, situation. I think speaks volumes to how connected they are as a program and as a staff, and how comfortable they feel with moving forward here into the offseason in making this decision.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see kind of how that plays out. And I think another podcast will be talking kind of about, who can step up and assume the role that Jamar Cain did, not only just in the obviously the defensive line room, but the recruiting front. Who's that guy that can maybe step up? That's another podcast for another day. Last but certainly not least, let's hit on this real quick. Glenn, we talked all things defense today, but Brian Kelly did hit on the offense, and he hit on some of the younger guys, especially the skill position. Sonny, I know that you listed Trey Holly as a sleeper candidate. Is it due to the amount of reps that he has received? I mean, what makes Trey Holly a sleeper candidate for you? And then Glenn, I want you to kind of piggyback on some of the things that you heard, maybe saw this past week at practice.
Well, when you have a class as good as LSU's had with as many 4-stars, it's kind of hard to find a sleeper,
Yeah.
But I think what I did, is I looked at it. We had 24/7 Sports had Trey Holly as a 3-star, I believe, with an 87 rating.
I think so.
And he was a 4-star on the composite. So of course, a lot of fans, oh, we've got him underrated. We've got him, we've got him underranked. But for me, it was just seeing what he brought to the table. What he brought to the table with his foot speed, with his quickness that he has, with his ability to stop and go and make people miss in the backfield, and then still be able to get positive real estate. Those were big for me, along with his recruiting ranking. But then also seeing how many reps he's gotten. And then when Brian Kelly talked about how he's really benefited from the, from the pass blocking, to where if you've got a true freshman coming in and you've got as many injured horses as LSU has in that running back room, 3 of them have missed a large part, if not all of the spring. Caleb Jackson's coming in after missing all of last season, minus the first half of the season opener. So you don't have a lot. You don't have a crowded house right now, because you've got a house with a bunch of guys who just can't play, because they're hurt. And so for Holly, with Holly getting all of the reps that he has with his skill set, with what he brings to the table, where if he's really kind of starting to get down the pass blocking side of playing running back, that's the hardest part for a high school kid to pick up. So if he's coming in with the skills and attributes that he has as far as being able to run the ball, and he's picking that up, that made me feel a lot better about that pick. That made me feel a lot better about it, because, I think that obviously with, John Emery, after this many years now, you don't know what you're going to get. You have no clue of what you're going to get. You have Armani Goodwin coming back from an injury. You have Josh Williams, where I feel like you know what you're going to get in his heart, every time he touches the field. But can his body hold up to that type of SEC schedule? And so when you put all of those questions in there, and then you have Holly just kind of coming in and really kind of taking advantage of the situation that he has under Noah Cain's tutelage. I think that Holly is a guy that if he continues to make the strides that he's made, that he could end up being one of the surprises of this running back room. Because I think if you're going into this season and before spring camp and you're listing all of the LSU running backs, I would probably have Trey. I would have probably had Trey fifth or sixth in that from 1 to 6 of the running back room in terms of where he fit into the plans in 2023. And, I think now you got to elevate that to middle of the pack and look at him as a guy like, okay, this guy's going to play in some capacity.
Yeah. And you're going to have those running backs to get through the season. Yeah, go ahead on that kind of other names maybe we're seeing.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of that, I think they've been really impressed with the true freshman tight ends they've had, McGohan and Markway. They think Markway is a physical presence that can really help them in the pass blocking aspect and the run blocking aspect of their offense. They think McGohan is already a catch and run kind of savant. They think he can be a really good kind of complementary piece to what Mason Taylor can do from a pass catching perspective. And maybe you don't have to lean as heavily, on Mason Taylor because you have a guy that can also be serviceable and complement the tight end room like that. So I think they like what they have with those two guys. I think one of the biggest kind of under the radar stories the last couple of weeks has been Bo Bordelon. I've heard a lot of great things about him and how he's adjusted. He's put on a lot of good weight. He's taken a lot of snaps at center. They feel really comfortable with him as kind of a backup center, backup interior lineman that can really go in and I think help LSU in some spots next year. And then the freshman receivers and how they've worked those two guys in, and Jaylen Brown and Kyle Parker. Brown, he's skinny. I mean, he's got to put on some weight, and I think that's going to be a big focus for him. But his athleticism and his potential are certainly screaming at you when you walk out there and you see him in individual drills. He was a little bit nicked up. I think they're hoping to have him cleared by the end of the week to get back into full practice mode. But, he's looked good. Kyle Parker is, a really kind of a guy that flew up, recruiting rankings last year in his senior season in Texas, and is a guy that I think LSU really likes. And then I think the biggest thing is, the evolution of the offense and just seeing how, Jaden Daniels can continue to evolve as a more aggressive passer down the field. I think that's been a big emphasis the last couple of weeks. And I think he's responding well to that, to those challenges in terms of pushing the ball downfield, giving some guys some more one-on-one opportunities down the field and making those decisions. And that comes with time. I mean, it's something. I think Mike Denbrock said it's just a mindset you have to have for him, and I think that's something he's really worked on in the offseason, and I think LSU is seeing some of the results there on the field. And I think when you work in with him and what you have with Garrett Nussmeier as a really just a absolute stud of a thrower, just gives LSU a couple really good options there. And they're going to lean in certainly to Jaden this year because of his dual threat ability, but I think they've been really impressed with what they've seen from Nussmeier as well.
Yeah, you mentioned, I think it was about a week or two ago, the way the ball comes off of Nussmeier's hands different. And I think we say it every podcast now, just to tease the fans and just create and stir up more conversation, which is never a bad thing.
Sure.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Go 24/7 podcast. My name is Bryce Kuhn. Glenn West and Sonny Ship joining me today on the podcast. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your week and Wednesday as we get closer to the end of spring ball. Transfer portal open backs up. And guys, it's going to be summertime before we know it. Camp season, and then workouts, and then fall camp. It is all going to kind of snowball from here in a good way. But
you'll officially become a Louisiana taxpayer.
Yeah,
I can't
Yeah.
wait, man. I can't wait. I
Yes.
booked the U-Haul yesterday, so we got the
Yes.
U-Haul booked, and
Awesome.
yeah, it'll be great. Absolutely fantastic. No, appreciate it, and it's going to be a lot of fun to be down there. Obviously, with the excitement surrounding this program, and man, I guess I'll get there just in time to watch baseball. Hopefully, deep into the postseason. So we'll see. We have to drop a baseball one every single podcast for sure. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Go 24/7 podcast. We'll catch you on the forums, on our YouTube page. Make sure to comment down below your thoughts on spring practice, how it's going, and any questions you may have going forward. We'll see you next time. Have a fantastic rest